All right, let's go ahead and get into the main part of our program. As I talked to you this morning about, we're doing the traffic engineering portion of this program this morning. And the first presentation we have this morning is from Mark Lipschultz for the Central Office Traffic Engineering Division with VDOT. And Mark's going to talk to us about a number of topics associated with basically where does that center line go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Hi, thank you for having me here at the webinars. My name is Mark Lipschultz. I am the Acting Signs, Marking, and Engineering Support Program Manager within Traffic Engineering Division. I think many of you have seen me before, and as part of my purview, I oversee everything related to pavement markings and markers and signs and some other stuff too. So I'd like to talk to you about a few things today. The first thing, and the primary reason why I was asked to present at these webinars is to talk about issues related to placement of the pavement joint and PIM grooves. But I also am going to take this opportunity to also talk about a couple other things. One is the federal MUTCD update process, and then just some other general reminders of things that are going to be in effect for this year's paving schedules. So with the joint, I'm going to start off by talking about just some of the background, so the current standards and specifications. So the first is in section 315.05C, placing and finishing. It requires the final joint be offset if it's a 2-lane road, then it's between 6 inches and 12 inches from the pavement center line. And if it's a lane with more than 2 lanes, then the joint needs to be approximately 6 inches offset from the lane lines. And then, of course, as you all know, there's also in there a requirement about offsetting the longitudinal joint in the final layer from the previous layer, that it needs to be at least 6 inches offset, with the exception of when the adjoining lanes are paved in echelon. Now with the PIMs, in the standards and specs, both in the special provision for PIMs as well as in standard drawing PM8, we state that the edge of the groove shall be at least 2 inches from the joints or crack. And then note that the PIM groove, it's 5 1/4 inches wide. We had a similar requirement in previous years when VDOT was using the cast iron snow plowables. But the difference was the cast iron snow plowable, it was just installed directly in the pavement. There was no groove, so it was a little bit narrower. And now we've gone to this groove that's 5 1/4 inches wide, and it's a little bit wider than the marker itself. The other relevant requirement is that the finished line of markers shall be straight. And we actually cite the tolerance requirement that is in place in the specs in section 704 for markings, which there's a whole lot of language, but basically what it comes down to is trying to quantify how wavy is too wavy. And that was put in the spec several years ago because we did have issues where we had contractors that kind of, their lines kind of did this, and were way too wavy, but we had a hard time enforcing it because it was just a qualitative judgment. So now there is actually language trying to define how wavy is too wavy. The third relevant language that is in the special provision for PIMs is that offset from the longitudinal joint shall take precedence over straightness of the line of markers. So what this means is that right now the way the specs currently read is that we want the markers to be straight, but more importantly is the need to offset it from the longitudinal joint by at least 2 inches. And just as a reminder, I've talked some about the PIM groove width, but the depth of the groove, it's between 0.4 inches and 0.5 inches for the approach groove, which is that long 7-foot approach, and that's kind of cut into the road so that the headlights are going to hit the reflector and bounce back to the driver's eye. And then where you get to the plunge cut, which is where the marker itself is, that's a 1 inch deep. So you cut that 1 inch plunge cut, you put in the marker, and then you fill it up with epoxy. Now with rumble stripes, I'll just mention those since we're talking about all the other things that are going on in the roadway surface. The rumble stripe is 16 inches wide as per standard drawing RS3. So that's as per the current standard drawing RS3. What I show here is what's in the draft of the new standard drawing RS3, which is not yet issued. And that will keep the rumble stripe, the centerline rumble stripe width at 16 inches, but it changes to a 7 inches distance between the double yellow lines. And that's the change that we've made globally to all double yellow lines. We've gone now to a 7 inches distance between the two adjacent lines. And we did that because when we made the switch from snow plowables to PIMs, as I mentioned before, the PIM groove has a width of 5¼ inches. So we felt that like with a 6 inches width, it would be kind of tricky to fit that 5¼ inch width between the double yellow lines, unless we went from 6 inches to 7 inches. And with the centerline rumbles, there's no particular language in there as far as the offset or distance between the centerline stripe, centerline rumble, and the joint. So how do you put this all together? Theoretically, there's no conflict, and I'll use the example of an undivided 2-lane road. And I've got this graphic here, so hopefully you all can see my mouse cursor as I record this. So here is the centerline joint. The pavement joint, I show it as being offset 6 inches from the road center line. So the pavement joint goes here. So first you do the pavement, then you install the double yellow lines. So you got the double yellow lines are centered about the roadway center line. And then you put in the this red crosshatched box here is the groove for the PIM, and that is centered between the double yellow lines. So if you do all that, you end up with 3¼ inches, 3.4 inches between the edge of the groove and the pavement joint. So that's well more than the 2-inch minimum. However, I will say this is a theoretical example. This doesn't account with for all the real world factors that go into the placement of the final joint when you're paving the road, for example, horizontal curvature. So what we are contemplating is a spec change. It would not be a spec change for this year's paving schedules, but something that we are considering for next year's paving schedules is a few things. One is, first of all, just to clarify that the rule in the special provision, when we talk about 2-inch distance from the joint, that is meant to apply to the final surface joint. So we're not talking about the existing. So in the case of, say, like a latex modified project, we're not talking about the distance from the existing joint. We're talking about the distance from the new joint after the latex modified product is applied. Now then, the other spec change then would be if you are talking about brand new asphalt or latex modified treatment, then what we are considering is stating that the edge of the PIM groove should be 2 inches from the final surface joint, but the alignment of PIMs with the line that it supplements and the straightness of the lines of PIMs is what's most important. So that would take precedence over the distance from the joint. I will say that we have had at least one project this past year where the PIMs, because of the way the roadway joint was, the PIMs ended up jumping a little bit to the left and to the right of the groove, and were not necessarily, sometimes they were in line with the skip line, sometimes they were not in line with the skip line. So not the end of the world, not an an immediate safety hazard, but it's probably something that does look a little bit goofy and might be noticeable to the driver, particularly at night. So we do want to get a nice clean final product where the line and the PIMs are all straight and the PIMs are exactly aligned with the line that they supplement. Now this would only apply to new asphalt. If you're ever installing a PIM in existing asphalt, which VDOT doesn't do very often or hardly at all, but if you ever were to do that, then the most important thing is to make sure that the PIM groove is at least 2 inches from any and all cracks, joints, and seams, because we don't want the installation of the PIM to accelerate degradation of the pavement surface. And same thing as well with any HCC surfaces, with concrete surfaces. You know, we really need to make sure that that PIM is at least 2 inches from the concrete joint. Excuse me. So with that, I'm going to switch topics and talk about the new MUTCD. So first, just some background. As many of you probably know, the current MUTCD is the 2009 edition. So it is several years out of date. They've been talking about a new MUTCD for years, and several advocacy groups like ASHTO and ITE and ATSA have all been pushing for a new MUTCD. Well, it finally came out. They issued a proposed rule. It was put out on the Federal Register website back in late December, and they identified 647 changes to the current MUTCD. That's a huge number of changes. You know, the current document is 700 and something pages long. The new document might very well be over 800 pages once all these new rules are in effect. And just as a reminder, the MUTCD is a legal requirement. All road agencies, including VDOT, localities, and toll roads, are required to comply with the MUTCD. And it covers a wide range of traffic control devices. So, you know, signs, markings, traffic signals, work zones, schools, railroad crossings, and bicycles. So the current status, it is open for public comment on the regulations.gov website until May, and I have the URL later on. Once that happens, then FHWA, they're legally required to consider and provide responses to all comments that are issued on the Federal Register website prior to issuing a final rule. That final rule could come out at any time. It could come out 1 month later or 5 years later. My guess is that it probably won't come out until at least mid 2022, just because, you know, they're going to probably get thousands of comments on the Federal Register, and realistically, there's no way that FHWA can get out a new rule this year. It might very well not happen until 2023. But once the final rule happens, then states have up to 2 years to either adopt the MUTCD as is or adopt a state-specific MUTCD, which is what VDOT would do. That would take a ton of effort on VDOT's end to review the final rule, develop our Virginia-specific MUTCD, get it approved by FHWA, and go before the CTB for approval. So we're not going to have a new Virginia MUTCD until at least 2024 and quite possibly later. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention today is because, in particular, some of the changes regarding pavement markings, those are likely the ones that are going to be of most interest to VAA. There are also some changes with regards to work zones, and Dave Rush and his team are very familiar with those changes. So this would also impact the next addition to the VWA PM. So with the line widths, they've got some pretty huge changes. This is probably the single biggest change anywhere in the entire MUTCD is with line widths. So on higher speed roads, right now VDOT, we universally use 4-inch line width for all of our WO lines, all of our center lines. And with white edge lines, we're starting to use more 6-inch edge lines. There is pretty good documentation that it's a very positive safety benefit to go to a 6-inch edge line, especially on your rural 2-lane roads where there's a high potential for safety improvement, but we're not doing it universally. The proposal would require that all lines shall be 6-inch, including the WO lines if it's a higher speed road, so anything 40 miles an hour and up. Now on low speed roads, they state that white edge lines should be 6 inches. I will mention that all these changes that I'm displaying here, a key reason for that is, in FHWA's mind, is probably trying to prepare roads to better accommodate the connected and autonomous vehicles. The camera systems that these vehicles use, and not just the truly autonomous vehicle of tomorrow, but the vehicles that are out there today that have lane keep assist and those types of systems, the camera is better able to detect a 6-inch line than a 4-inch line. And when the previous Federal Transportation Secretary, so Secretary Trow, announced the new MUTCD a couple years ago, that was her key emphasis area, was accommodating the connected and autonomous vehicles. And then similarly on a divided non-limited access highway, right now a lot of our lines are 6 inches, but it's not a universal thing. And the proposal would state that all lines shall be 6 inches. There's not really as much change on the limited access. So when you look at a DOT the size of VDOT and you add it all up, and you look at just the initial installation cost with the life cycle cost, we're looking at something like $7 million to $9 million per year impacts, and a pretty, a somewhat significant cost impact to any given resurfacing schedule, especially one that's several miles of 2-lane road, and now you're going from, 4-inch lines to 6-inch lines, the cost per foot is pretty nominal, but when you add it up over several miles, it starts to add up. With the symbol and message markings, with the arrows, right now there is language that allows VDOT to omit arrows, like in the example you see here on US 460, because the geometry makes it pretty obvious that that's a turn lane and not a through lane. You know, we have, I don't know how many thousands of turn lanes like this, and to my knowledge, we've never really had an issue with drivers getting into this lane thinking that it's a through lane. Now, here again, the human driver has absolutely no problem with this. With the connected and autonomous vehicle, those cameras are sometimes just not as smart as the human driver. So, you know, I think that's perhaps why FHWA proposed this change, but we are looking at a close to $500,000 a year impact to VDOT. And then with the chevron markings, the feds have proposed that these, right now, these markings are purely optional, and VDOT uses it on very much a case-by-case basis. You know, if you have a certain individual gore area where there's a big problem with drivers kind of swerving at the last minute going across the neutral area, then we'll add them in, but we certainly don't do it everywhere. And the feds have proposed to state that these chevron markings should be used for all entrance and exit gore areas on the interstates and all pork chop island neutral areas, even on lower speed roads. So we are preliminarily estimating a $3 million a year impact just to VDOT. Now I'll add, this is, you know, we're only looking at financial impacts to VDOT. I wouldn't even begin to estimate what would be the fiscal impact to all the localities that maintain their own roads with these rule changes. So here's the link and how to comment. I will say for the VDOT employees in the room, VDOT is assembling our official comments to the docket. So please don't be submitting comments on your own, or at least as a VDOT employee. I suppose if you want to submit personal comments, that is okay. But I did want to provide this for all the non-VDOT people in the room, just as an FYI, in case VAA or any contractors want to submit comments, here's how you do it. Then just a few other reminders. We do have a new temporary markings policy that is out there and effective. This INIM, it doesn't directly apply to contractors, at least on a traditional design bid build contract. But where it does apply is to the designers who are assembling MOT plans, especially for more complicated MOT plans where there is shifting of lanes and there's a need for temporary markings. And it would also apply to design build and P3 contracts. So what the policy set forth is a few things. One is when is removable tape required, or when is a 6-inch width instead of 4-inch width required for the temporary markings. The second key thing is under certain circumstances, temporary markings are going to be required to have contrast properties, meaning so in the case of removable tape, I call it the Oreo tape. So it's instead of just a white line, it's you know, a thin blue border on each side of the white line, kind of looks like an Oreo cookie. And then the last part of this is during construction, there's a requirement that internally within VDOT that the district traffic engineer has to sign off on any request to use paint instead of removable tape during construction. In general, this is the INIM is written as it applies to all work zones, but generally it's really going to only have much of an impact for complex construction projects. So, you know, you're not going to see much change to your typical paving schedule project. With PIMS, that's going to be a topic a little bit later on, but so I don't want to too much steal the thunder, but just a few reminders. Overall, first of all, I want to again thank industry for doing this huge change over to PIMS last year. And by and large, it was successful. We've now got thousands of those PIMS in place, and a lot of them are looking real good and seem to be holding up pretty well so far. But just a few reminders. One is a safety reminder. We did have at least one work zone crash where it appears part of the cause may have been that the train of vehicles got too elongated. So the truck that was installing the, doing the grooving got too far ahead of the truck that was installing the epoxy and setting the PIM in place. And so it's a mobile work zone, but the driver sees the first truck and he doesn't see any other work zone truck on the horizon. So he thinks the work zone is done and he gets back into the closed lane prematurely. Second thing is to make sure that these teeth that you see here, they need to be completely covered. So as you're installing the epoxy, put a little pressure down with your fingers, make sure that thing is pressed into place, that you fill up this, fill it up all the way until the teeth are covered. And then when you let go, these tabs, the breakaway tabs, they should be resting firmly on the surface of the pavement on either side of the PIM. And then the last thing is, if the contract does call for fog sealing of the groove, the approach grooves north and south of the PIM, make sure that you fully protect this reflector, the PIM itself, while you're doing the fog sealing, so that you don't get all that gunk on the reflector. Because if you do that, you're going to have to, the contractor's going to have to come back out and pop out this reflector and install a new reflector. Because obviously you're not going to be scrubbing clean these reflectors. One other reminder, this is an internal policy change that I don't think I've mentioned this before at a VAA forum, but I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of it. We have stopped maintaining these aerial speed enforcement markings. And we told the districts all about this sometime middle of next year. So there should not be any in 2021 paving schedules, but in case one slipped through the cracks, please don't do this. The reason why is several years ago, back in the early 2000s, I believe, VDOT had made a commitment to the state police that we would put these markings in place. And at one time, the state police was pretty actively doing aerial enforcement of speed, but they have not done it, and they haven't had the budget to do it for several years. So we kind of finally got some buy-in that we would stop maintaining these markings. It is still authorized by law, so there is theoretically a chance that the state police may restart this program at some point in the future, in which case we'll have to go back out and install these markings. But that honestly doesn't seem like a strong likelihood. So there's no point in us wasting our money and continuing to maintain these markings anymore. One other reminder, we did implement a spec change last year that we now allow as an option, the data logger system. I'm definitely very interested in this to see how this works. The advantage, or one of the advantages, should be that it would allow you to automatically measure your bead rate and material rate, so you don't have to stop every 3 hours to do the traditional VTM 94 measurement, where you measure the do the paint over the test plate, and you use the bucket to measure how long it takes your beads to come out of your bead gun. I know I've heard in the past from Asphalt Association that there may not be a lot of contractors out there, at least as of last year, that have this system already. But I would certainly encourage all the stripers in the room to at least consider it. There could be advantages that you may find for your own internal business practices. And then for the VDOT staff in the room, please let me know if you do hear of any contractors, or you do have any contractors that are using this and piloting it, just so that we can monitor it. A future topic for another day is, there are multiple state DOTs that make DLS mandatory, at least on large jobs. VDOT may someday move in that direction, but at least for now, in order for us to even consider that, I want to see how this pilot works. And then the last reminder, please save the date. For those of you who are involved in the Traffic Engineering Co-op, it is going to be on April 20th. And one of the key focus areas for that meeting is going to be potential spec changes for 2022 paving schedules. And with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to put this together. You've covered a broad range of topics there this morning that all associated with not just where the center line goes, but some of the paving marking materials that are out there now and the plastic inlaid markers. We have a few questions coming in, folks, and I hope you'll continue to ask those questions. That's why we're here today. Don't forget that, while we're here, even though this is a virtual event, makes it a little more complicated. This is the time to start getting some of those questions out so that we can all hear the answers to those questions at the same time. That way we're all singing off the same song sheet. So again, thank you for your time, Mark. Next up, we're going to, whoop, I went one too many. Next up, we're going to hear from Jeremy Cobb and Connie Vest. Jeremy Cobb is with the Richmond District construction section. I believe he's an area construction engineer in Richmond District. And Connie Vest is with Mullins Markings. So we'll get a perspective on plastic inlaid markers from both VDOT and industry. So first we're going to have up Jeremy Cobb, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.